common mistakes that these large organizations or the projects they make.
आपने पूरा काम कर लिया, आपने पूरा रिसर्च कर लिया, आपने एडवोकेसी पोजीशन और फिर आपने किसी को दे दिया कि आप कम्युनिकेट कर लो। जो प्रोडक्ट है वो इनहेरेंटली कम्युनिकेबल होता ही नहीं।
The system in education that we have is 200 years old. I think 800 million jobs would be lost to automation and AI by 2030.
There will be an effect. हाँ, I do agree that top creatives will not be affected. People worry about the advancement of technology and its inherent dangers. It's actually the behavior of humans that you have to worry about.
Social structures, especially like in the backdrop of population collapse.
It's not a terrible thing to have a smaller world that isn't chasing growth all the time. Epidemic of the future is loneliness.
So it would be interesting to know how we define humans.
Worry about defining life. I better delete them before they delete me. I think we're the kind of species who will drive ourselves to extinction.
3, 2, 1. Thank you for coming over.
थैंक यू, आपने बहुत इज्जत अफजाई की। आई रियली वांटेड टू बी अ पार्ट ऑफ दिस पॉडकास्ट। बहुत चर्चा है इस पॉडकास्ट के बारे में, ठीक है ना। विमेंस सर्कल्स में ख़ास तौर पे आप बड़े चैम्पियन हैं विमेंस इश्यूज़ पे। मैंने कहा आ जाता हूँ, कुछ सीख भी लेता हूँ आपसे।
श्योर, विल ट्राई आवर बेस्ट कि आज आप कुछ सीख के जाएं।
नहीं, छोकरा का लेवल है।
So your Wikipedia says that you're a political commentator, you are a radio show host, you are a TV anchor, a journalist, and much more. And at the top of that, you're also a development communications expert, a well-known and well-respected one in our sector. So, जब आप when you're talking to your kids, how do you explain it to them कि आप करते क्या हैं?
तो I mean, usually it's hard to explain because अक्सर वही होता है कि I have a lot of interests और थोड़ा बहुत I need things to be different to keep it exciting. तो you joke around कि ADD है, attention deficit disorder है, you need something exciting here and there. लेकिन इस entry में some things are no longer current, like radio मैं नहीं कर रहा आजकल, journalist I never was. वो तो सिर्फ even if you're on TV, you're an analyst, you're talking about things, आप असल में तो और लोगों के काम से फ़ायदा उठा रहे होते हैं। यू आर लुकिंग एट प्राइमरी रिपोर्टिंग। तो आई वुड सजेस्ट कि जर्नलिस्ट तो बहुत बड़ी चीज़ होती है। ये हम एक लोअर ऑर्डर वो होते हैं, कभी ना कभी वी गेट डिसप्रोपोर्शनेट अमाउंट्स ऑफ अटेंशन, लेकिन काम फंडामेंटली उन्हीं का होता है। द हेल्थ ऑफ द सिस्टम इज़ बेस्ड ऑन दोज पीपल, बिकॉज एनालिस्ट आपको बहुत मिल जाते हैं। हर लिविंग रूम में भी एक होता है। And so I guess the best way I'd explain it is कि जो मेरा शौक है and what I bring maybe to the table is synthesis, different strands of thought and bringing some sort of meaning to them, something that's actionable or some kind of description to it. उसमें भी खामियां बहुत है, लेकिन I think that's the best way I would describe it.
Right. और being a development communications expert, you've worked for multiple organizations and Pakistan में like a lot of reforms projects and you've been part of that. What are the like common mistakes that you see that these large organizations or the projects they make?
So that's a great question. उसमें ये है कि one is that in some ways the thinking is usually a little behind the times, या उनका अंडरस्टैंडिंग थोड़ा सा और होता है। एक ये होता है कि उनकी सोच बाइनरी होती है, या मैं रेडियो पे कम्युनिकेशन कर लूँ, या मैं किसी मस्जिद के मुल्ला से कर लूँ, या मैं टीवी पे कर लूँ। एंड द फैक्ट ऑफ द मैटर इज़ दैट परसुएशन इज़ अ वेरी डिफ़िकल्ट थिंग। आपको बहुत सारे इनपुट से एक बंदा सुन लें, if you just hear it on the radio again and again, it doesn't have the same effect. But if you then see it on TV or you read about it, it makes you think. तो और दूसरा ये है कि आई थिंक कि डेवलपमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस उनको एक समझ होती है कि डिसएग्रीगेशन इज़ पॉसिबल। कि अगर मैंने आपको कह दिया कि आप अपना मोहल्ला साफ़ रखें, तो फिर अगर हम कोई रिसर्च स्टडी कर लें कि व्हाई डिड यू चूज़, इट्स वेरी हार्ड फॉर द एवरेज पर्सन टू अंडरस्टैंड कि व्हाट कंट्रीब्यूटेड टू माय डिसीजन। वो सिर्फ आखिरी चीज़ों से याद आ जाती है कि इस पॉइंट पे मैंने किया था, बट देयर इज़ अ लॉट ऑफ कम्युनिकेशन इनपुट्स दैट गो इन बिफोर यू डू दैट। तो एक तो ये मसला है। दूसरा मसला ये है कि अक्सर जो पावर स्ट्रक्चर है ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस का, इट्स टोटली डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द कमर्शियल सेक्टर। कमर्शियल सेक्टर में व्हेन दे आर मेकिंग समथिंग न्यू, दे थिंकिंग ओके अल्टीमेटली हाउ डू आई कम्युनिकेट। तो उसमें कॉम्स बहुत जल्दी इन्वॉल्व हो जाती हैं। यहाँ इन द डेवलपमेंट सेक्टर आपने पूरा काम कर लिया, आपने पूरा रिसर्च कर लिया, आपने एडवोकेसी पोजीशन और फिर आपने किसी को दे दिया कि आप कम्युनिकेट कर लो। उसमें प्रॉब्लम ये आ जाता है कि अक्सर वो जो प्रोडक्ट है वो इनहेरेंटली कम्युनिकेबल होता ही नहीं है।
Right.
And then if you had a comms person in at the beginning who understands policy या who understands research, वो पहले से आपको बता देता कि आपको ये चीज़ें include करनी है for it to sort of move forward. I also think कि एक ये है कि maybe you shouldn't get into comms in the development sector as your first job.
Right.
उसमें आपको exposure बहुत कम मिल जाता है. Because ultimately you're leveraging other areas. You're leveraging the press, you're leveraging advertising agencies, you're leveraging products, you're leveraging social media. और जो the way the development sector works, obviously उनका जो पैसा है is, it's एक अमानत है, right? Whether it's from the taxpayer of another country, whether it's charity, whether it's something else, वो inherently conservative होते हैं.
Right.
And what they do is that they tend to make the message so sterile. कि ठीक है, nobody will object to what you've done, but no one is convinced either. तो ये जो एक फ़ायदा है कि like if you've worked in other areas, so then you at least bring that perspective to the table, and then you're outside of like say the thinking that tends to exist, जहाँ पे not only what you have to do is important, लेकिन also how do you maintain कि आपका जो organization है या वो है कि वो किसी unnecessary controversy में ना पड़ जाए. वो safety premium कभी इतना ज़्यादा होता है development organizations में कि इतना डर होता है कि कोई एक बंदा, but actually you have to build risk into the thing कि आप जो बात भी कह ले, there's going to be 10-15% of the people who just don't like it. जितनी भी इंसानियत वाली बात हो,
Yeah.
कोई ना कोई रीज़न कोई निकाल लेता है. सो क्रिटिसिज्म जो आता है इज़ दैट व्हेन इट गोज़ अगेंस्ट दिस सॉर्ट ऑफ लाइक रिस्क अवर्जन, उसमें एक प्रॉब्लम ये आ जाता है कि जब आप फिर अपना प्रोडक्ट तैयार करते हो, वो प्रोडक्ट अफेक्ट हो जाता है बिकॉज वो बहुत ज़्यादा वाटर डाउन हो जाता है. वो ऐसे बन जाता है कि लाइक इट ऑलमोस्ट बिकम्स लाइक अ मॉरलाइजिंग प्रोडक्ट. एंड मॉरलाइजिंग जो है, आई वुड आर्ग्यू कि बहुत ज़्यादा अबंडेंस में है. आई डोंट थिंक, अगर आप पिछले हफ्ते में भी निकालो, किसी ने आपको कोई एडवाइस दी होगा, मॉरलाइज की होगी, ये वो. एंड वी आर sort of conditioned now to accept, not contest, but not change our behavior. And the last one is, I would also suggest is that कभी न कभी जो रिसर्च कमीशन होती है, which sometimes becomes the basis of comms, उसमें प्रॉब्लम ये अक्सर आता है कि वो जो रिसर्च होती है, sometimes it's a large scale quantitative survey, things like that. So it'll say 78% of the people believe X and Y. Yeah, this problem exists. But at the end of the day, you still wonder कि इसमें insight क्या है?
Yeah.
कि like, how do I actually get people's attention to something? And maybe there's one last thing that I'd also like to say. And I think in that respect, the commercial sector is doing really well. Sometimes in the development sector, they approach everything as an information deficit problem. ये लोगों को बस पता नहीं है. अगर इनको पता होता, then we could get these behaviors. But you see, human beings are much more complex than that. We are not as rational as everyone likes to believe or how we think about ourselves. So, for example, smoking है. It's very clear कि smoking के negative effects क्या है. And, over at least half a century when they've been doing campaigns about this, people are still smoking. Now that they have another aspect of smoking, which is digital smoking, taken up with vaping, they're moving on to that. I'd argue that one of the best financial decisions you can make in your life for your family is to buy life insurance or to buy health insurance. Log nahi karte. Because जो human beings है, they've got a discount rate on adverse effects in the future. कहते होगा ही नहीं, we're going to be the exceptions. So simply providing information is not enough. So what usually happens is that you also have to find those behavior triggers. And a lot of those happen to be around emotions. And sometimes I find in the development sector that that's a hard thing for them to grasp because it's not as discrete, it's not as linear. It's much more amorphous. So for example, जब COVID आया था, तो कोविड में यही था कि सब ने कह दिया कि 6 फुट का फासला रखें,
Yeah.
आप मास्क पहने, हैंड वॉश करें, क्लिनिकल मैसेजेस. But all around the world, there was, a failure to adhere to these things. उसमें behavioral insights बहुत सारे आए थे, but some of the big ones was that if I tell you ये कर लो अपने लिए, अच्छा है, but then आप तो यही देंगे कि मैं कोई सुपरमैन चैम्पियन हूँ, ठीक है ना, मुझे हो जाएगा, ये तो जुकाम है, whatever. It didn't work as well. What did work is if you framed it as you saving somebody else's life.
Right.
Okay, the people who are important, like do it for your grandfather, do it for your mother, do it, and so it's a small distinction, but it had a significant change. वो, so I mean I think जब आप कहते हैं कि comms in the development sector, इसमें जो असली चीज़ है वो ये है कि the problem with comms is that everyone's a communicator. सबने communications products देखे हैं. So then they naturally feel कि they have these pedestrian या very easy ideas about कि ये होना चाहिए. And this presumption कि people will automatically pick it up. और ये होता नहीं है. And so I would argue it's like a much more complex undertaking. And the second thing is कि उसकी जो outcomes होती हैं, huge, chaotic, वो है, you can't predict. And तो उसमें you have to have a higher appetite for risk. You have to have a higher appetite for imprecision. You have to have a higher appetite also for, the sort of really magic sauce, which is creativity. और ये चीज़ें बना के, I mean, I think that's where you get sometimes interesting things that come out. And इसमें ये भी है कि this also depends on, like, I'm talking about campaigns and things like that, but then there's also like a massive part of the comms in the development sector where it's direct engagement, door to door, things like that. Usme bhi, I think the polio campaign is an interesting example because you've got like a very localized objection to it. And the problem with polio is कि जब तक आपने 100% इसका खात्मा नहीं किया, ये ख़त्म नहीं होता. Like you can't say कि 99.9% of the people are हाँ वो drop लगा लेंगे. अगर वो 0.1 कर रहा है, that disease just will not go out of the
Right.
ecosystem.
So it rises again.
It rises again. ठीक है, इसकी cyclical rate होती है.
Yeah.
And then figuring out what are the objections. उसमें भी complexities आती हैं. लोग अक्सर कहते हैं कि बस ठीक है, आप जो है ना डंडा enforce कर दें. लेकिन जब आप डंडा इन्फोर्स करते हैं, जो उनकी एसेंशियल नेचर ऑफ सस्पिशन है, वो तो फिर री इन्फोर्स हो जाती है कि ये तो ज़ोर से कर रहे हैं. हमारा तो डर ही ये था कि ये हमें फोर्सबली स्टेरलाइज कर रहे हैं फ्रॉड से. अब तो ये खुल के आ गए हैं. दूसरा ये कि आप उन इलाकों को भी देख लें. लाइक द आंसर मे नॉट जस्ट बी ए क्वेश्चन ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन. इट मे नॉट जस्ट बी अ क्वेश्चन of people are naturally suspicious, या ये लोग ही अलग है. No, but actually you look at it, let's say the tribal areas, 70 साल तो आपने उनको एक बफर जोन बनाया. ना उनके पास पुलिस था, जुडिशरी था, ना उनके पास वो चीज़ें थी. आपने उनका मूवमेंट कंट्रोल किया, आपने कलेक्टिव पनिशमेंट की. आजकल हम इजराइल में देख रहे हैं, हमें कितना बुरा लग रहा है. बट फंक्शनली आई मीन वी वर ऑल्सो इन्फोर्सिंग द सेम. कि एक बंदे ने चोरी की, अब पूरे उस स्ट्रीट के घर हमने गिरा दिए हैं, जस्ट टू मेक श्योर दैट देयर वाज अ कलेक्टिव सेंस ऑफ वो. तो जब आपने 70 साल ऐसे किया, ऑब्वियसली यू आर गोइंग टू बी सस्पिशियस ऑफ अथॉरिटी. ऑब्वियसली जब आपकी एक कॉन्फ्लिक्ट आ गई उस इलाके में, and there was obviously some of that was driven by international actors as well, domestic, so you're going to have a more paranoid worldview. So I'm just saying is that usually that's the problem with comms, that outcomes are not ever guaranteed, and getting behavior to change is far more complex. And वो जो एक linear programming preference होता है of the development sector, that's not always conducive to creating a good solution. And secondly, maybe also the lack of willingness to try different things. Because comms में ये भी होता है कि like you throw out a couple of feelers. So like one of the things that we do in the digital space is like sometimes we have to post the same thing 2-3 times. But if you're a bit more interested in outcomes, you'll change the text a little bit. You'll change the content just to see what is working for your particular audience. So I would suggest that like it's sometimes more complex than it appears on the surface, and उसमें एक inherent tension है in the way that the sector is structured.
Right.
And the outcomes they're looking for. So, I mean, I think also I'll give you an example which I found fascinating. So, there was this research study, और अब मुझे इसकी particulars and the exact numbers मैं भूल गया हूँ. But it was fascinating to see कि when they studied the police of Lahore, for example, and then they compared the results of how people felt about the police in Lahore और ममालिकों में. तो उन्होंने देखा कि पुलिस ऑफ लाहौर का लेट्स से एक्स अमाउंट ऑफ रेजोल्यूशन रेट था कि उन्होंने कोई क्राइम हल किया या कोई मसला हल किया. पुलिस ऑफ लाहौर वर डिस्पाइज्ड ट्वाइस एज मच इवन कंपेयर टू अदर कंट्रीज जहाँ पे द रेजोल्यूशन रेट वाज हाफ एज मच. लाइक सो व्हाट दैट मेंट वाज दैट द पुलिस इन लाहौर वाज मोर पॉपुलर डिस्पाइट डूइंग अ बेटर जॉब देन अदर कंट्रीज जहाँ पे they were doing a worse job. So again, the question is like, how do human beings respond? So उसमें interesting चीज़ ये है कि there is this idea around कि what people want maybe is not that substantive. You know, like maybe they do want justice, but what matters to them is how they're treated during the process. आप FIR के लिए गए, तमीज़ से बात हुई, because at that time you're a bit, traumatized, कुछ हुआ हो, आप, कोई dispute हो, चोरी हुई हो, and then throughout the process, like how is it that you've been treated?
Yeah.
Even if in the end आपकी गाड़ी they don't find, but your opinion of it is dependent on that. So I'm just saying is like this in a way is a very interesting thing about human behavior.
Yeah.
Okay, not the substantive element, but the procedural element. And that has, like, for example, a very big implication, not only for how you have policy, but also for comms. It's about the individual and how they are service-oriented. Even agar masla wo hal kar sake, na kar sake.
I think same is true for the doctors. Like a lot of doctors jinke paas hum jaate hain, who would listen to you and who would try to sort of like help you out.
Yeah.
You would remember them, you would feel good about their competence overall, compared to somebody who's not interested in listening to you, regardless of their competence level comparatively.
The पिछले 20-25 साल से, या I guess a little more, या 30 years, the NHS in the UK has made bedside manner a very big thing. कि यार वो आपसे बात कैसे करता है, आपकी बात वो सुनता है. And now I've seen from my childhood, जब मैं जाता था, as a sickly child with asthma, how I was treated, या were they listening. और अब जब मैं जाता हूँ, ज़मीन आसमान का फ़र्क है, because a lot of these doctors have come back, they've been trained in the UK and elsewhere. और again, even in that, so अब मैं ज़रा unscientific बात करूँगा, लेकिन वो ये है कि and I'm sure there's that placebo effect, right?
Yeah.
If you believe you are being treated,
Yeah.
you feel better. There's something, because आपके जो stress hormones हैं, वो तो वैसे ही बॉडी को ख़राब करते हैं, वो रिड्यूस हो जाते हैं while you're ill, things like that. If you believe कि कोई शिफा आने वाला है, so there is an effect for the body. And so I'm just saying again, and I think that's a great example, कि this is, all these things then play into communications.
Yeah.
कि, usually it would mean that, for example, कि obviously a question of authenticity and competence is one thing. So if you were communicating a hospital, you would say like, we've got the best. But for a lot of people, remember, being sick is also being in a position of indignity. आपका पेट खराब होता है, there are tubes inside you, people have to help you, the things that you could do before you can't do right now. And at that point, if people treat you well, ये एक आपकी psychological vulnerability है. Obviously, you've got like an existential vulnerability कि यार disease मुझे ख़राब कर देगा, invalid कर देगा, मार देगा. But this other point is being addressed also. So in that level, I mean, these are things that end up mattering a lot in comms.
So we've been talking about like a lot of stuff related to the future of a lot of things, and I think it's been over a decade that we've been working together and discussing a lot of things. And now I feel, if I compare to the discussions we had like 10 years ago, maybe, is that we probably are now living in that future that we used to talk about. It feels more real, especially after ChatGPT has been launched. How do you see the overall future of communications in the backdrop of AI and automation, when, like, including the fake news, including misinformation and all of that? So in next 5-6 years, for example, where is this thing going?
तो इसके I'll answer this in two parts. ठीक है, एक तो ये है कि like what is the effect on society, which is one part of your question, and what is the effect on the profession. So the effect on society, जैसे अगर हम 10 साल पहले बात करते थे, उसे 15, let's take it back even further, let's take it down to 15 years. जब सोशल मीडिया पहले आया था ना, वी ऑलवेज हैव दिस व्यू ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी कि ये यूटोपियन होगा, कि ये जो है ना, ये जो हम गंद करते हैं, एक दूसरे से लड़ते हैं, हम सेल्फिश बिहेवियर ऑफ एंड द मायोपिक वर्ल्ड व्यू ऑफ ह्यूमन बींग्स, ये ख़त्म हो जाएगा. वी जस्ट नीड टू कनेक्ट मोर. एंड ये एक लिहाज से मुझे याद है जब फेसबुक था और ये था, वो आइडिया था कि सारे लोग जो है ना, the Americans are suspicious of the Russians, yeah, we don't like Indians. If we just get to know each other through these means, जहाँ से borders are no longer hard and impenetrable, can't be crossed, चीज़ें बेहतर हो जाएंगी. But as that technology evolved, I mean, it's actually made things worse. We've discovered we don't like each other, that those contentious issues cannot be overcome by these things. So abhi artificial intelligence, we are in one way is different from social media, because social media का हमने इस लेवल का कभी सोचा नहीं था when we were younger कि ये भी कोई चीज़ होगा. But thanks to Terminator, we all knew कि AI जब आएगा, हालात शायद बुरे हो जाए. And the whole idea of AI was कि ये self aware हो जाएगा,
and then it goes out of human control.
It goes out of human control. जो AI अभी आई है, I mean already people are impressed by it, but अभी से डर रहे हैं कि इसका बहुत बड़ा effect होगा on employment. इसमें भी अगर if it starts behaving in strange ways, और इसके और भी benefits, because AI is now going to be definitely become part of weaponry, like missiles and ये वो. अब human का एक ये फ़ायदा है कि कभी ना कभी ज़मीर जाग जाता है कि यहाँ तो बच्चे हैं, यहाँ वो है, कुछ ना कुछ hesitation हो जाता है. And AI obviously will just look at the parameters, mission parameters, do the most damage. Now, I think about AI, the problems are somewhat, I think, जो social media, they've taught us a bit. एक तो ये है कि the power of AI is increasing at rates that we had not conceived of. Like every iteration of ChatGPT, for example, सिर्फ just like a year ago, we played around with it, fun images आ जाते हैं, अब तो पता ही नहीं लगता कि ये है या नहीं है. दूसरा जो है, its ability to write. You see, AI is also a black box. They've trained these models, but they don't know exactly how these models work. So I remember reading about one particular AI which was trained to do a specific function, but somehow over time it learned multiple languages.
Right.
So they couldn't actually work back कि ये इसने कैसे किया. Now this black box phenomena of the AI is one of the troubling parts.
Right.
And जब ChatGPT भी आ रहा था, at some point, like they didn't understand कि यार ये झूठ क्यों भाई बोल रहा है.
Yeah.
Right? You type in something, it was making up fake citations, make pieces of research. एक दो lawyers तो खराब भी हो गए हैं इसमें.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a need कि इसे regulate करें, because it's very powerful and potentially very useful. लेकिन इसमें dangers जो है, at least social media has taught us, is that we need to have some form of regulation for this. अब जो है, like the impact it will have on professions, for example.
Yeah.
Filmmakers पे बहुत बड़ा effect होगा, because I just saw, I forget if it was Delphi or something else, and it's able to make like these 1 minute or half a minute films that are just visually stunning.
Yeah. By just like the text description that you give about it.
Oh, and in some ways, it's incorporating really high levels of creativity.
Right.
I mean, it's obviously, it's not creativity is not something AI understands, but just because we don't understand how it's processing, And because text to idea, usme significant room hai for it to play around. So it's making really interesting things. Ye, again, for graphic designers, for writers. So there is a period of change coming, at least in the communications industry. And I'd argue that in some things it'll be better. It'll do a better job than human beings. Ye hai ki human beings ka kaam khatam bilkul nahi hoga.
Right.
You're going to still need people to vet it. There is still a premium for because AI है, लेकिन एक जो bridge है AI का is to artificial general intelligence. वो अभी तक नहीं आया.
Right. So that's like when we hit singularity. So that's
Close to it.
Right.
हाँ, to singularity. So singularity is being self-aware, being like a life form essentially. और वो भी, I mean, I often think about that because science fiction मुझे बहुत पसंद है. I'm obsessed by it.
yeah.
And you see, the really interesting thing is जब before ये जो सारा chat GPT and this sort of AI, पहले machine learning था.
Yeah.
You'd feed a lot. अभी भी machine learning है. I mean, that's how it feeds into this. But like वो बहुत simplified model था. तो उसमें you fed in tons of data.
Yeah.
ठीक है, you fed in tons of banking data, for example. And then you could have an automated response for a loan that was coming. And what they discovered is that those, very early AI systems were extremely racist. If there was a black person in a certain address, वो बस direct reject कर देता.
Right.
Now, inherently, though, it's not racist. It doesn't recognize white or black. But what it was कि वो जो data अंदर आ रहा था.
जो उसका training data है, that was also trained by fed by humans who inherently had those biases.
And that's how the system eventually became. So एक तो ये डर है कि ये जो अगर AI becomes sentient, तो it's going to become sentient based on वो जो कमीनापन हम लोग करते हैं.
Yeah.
And उसमें problem ये है कि वो तो फिर that will influence it as well. That data essentially, it's not going to be some very zen-like creature के already self-actualized. वो तो वो होगा. और then I think that again with the development of these systems like recently, to prevent these things, Google has its own AI that it tried. I think it's called Gemini.
Right.
तो उन्होंने क्या किया कि we want to have a more, I don't like this word, but a more woke AI.
Yeah.
तो उन्होंने कहा कि यार, it should have a representative of the world. So now the problem was that it yielded results that were really bad. It wrote, can you get me a picture of, Germany and World War II, ठीक है ना, तो उसमें black people, Asian people भी salute कर रहे हैं to, Hitler. हर चीज़ में historical inaccuracies आ गई है. So there's like a lot of difficulty in actually then moving into the system and adding parameters to it that you think will work, but then they have unintended consequences. But I don't know. I think AI is fascinating. I think ये जो artificial general intelligence, या sentience, या the singularity, I don't understand enough science.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is actually going to come or not. But already जो Turing test है, can you, I mean, I'd argue sometimes you see an engagement with ChatGPT or one of these others, it sounds like, बहुत stuffy, बुड्ढा aristocratic अंग्रेज आपसे बात कर रहा हूँ.
Yeah.
So not truly alive, but close to it. लेकिन, I think that moving forward, इसमें दूसरा मसला ये भी होगा कि AI is now being atomized. I mean, we've been exposed to AI at the level where the AI is in a centralized server like ChatGPT and these others, and but now they're giving generative capabilities जब ये आपके devices में आ जाए.
Right.
That's going to be different. That's going to be a different ball game altogether. And the other thing is that even technology as we know it is going to change. I mean, the one thing, I'm not good at predicting the future. ये सलाहियत मेरी इतनी नहीं है.
I remember even maybe just before ChatGPT came in, we were talking about Alexa.
हाँ.
And I remember asking you this question, could this somehow in near future become really good? And I remember you telling it cannot give those analysis.
Yeah.
It can just give you simple answers, but not those analysis. And like I think it's been like 2 years now.
हाँ.
कि ChatGPT के बाद से now those things that we used to read or like they feel more real now.
They feel much more
So
real.
the rate at which it's pacing, I think like that's phenomenal.
I guess, I mean, I'm not a science or data guy, लेकिन बस वही ज़रा सा interest है. तो वो यही है कि, you know, with AI and as we move forward, uska, like, you know, the case of, let's say, Alexa, I mean, in some ways, they were limited by the vision of the firm itself. Like, they had so much, like, usme data issues bhi thi. And that's why partly someone like OpenAI went so far ahead.
Yeah.
Because if I knew कि ये मेरा Alexa device जो है ना मेरी हर बात लिख रहा है और फिर उसे सीख रहा है,
Yeah.
I would be fairly कि पता नहीं what are they retaining मेरे घर में बिल्कुल bug आ गया ये वो. But with OpenAI, I mean, they've gotten ahead. And it's interesting that in one respect that Google was already there. They had their own AI, but they just never released it.
Right.
They wanted to perfect it.
Yeah.
Whereas these guys just went ahead and they had like a bootstrapping thing. It was Niklo seekh lenge. So, which is fine for now, but what if the systems are so much more powerful in the future that you'd require a much higher level of responsibility? But going back to my other point is like, you know, I don't know if these systems will ever become truly sentient. Yeah, there will be a singularity. But already at some level, you know, if you're used to like relatively boring and stoic people, so the Turing test can be passed in some ways. They do talk to you like as if they're really, you know, a human being behind the screen.
You remember like in 2017, I guess. So I read one of the articles this time by McKinsey Global Institute, which mentioned that I think 800 million jobs would be lost to automation and AI by 2030. And then I also read somewhere that, you know, just a thought that the system in education that we have is 200 years old. And at the rate at which things are changing, whatever kids are studying in the schools is not going to be relevant by the time they're ready to join their professions. And back then, if you remember, in my own capacity as well, I started that small institute, Robotech. We were focusing on STEM education, or a lot of development folks also like came in. We sort of like tried to give awareness to the parents what sort of professions are available, so that by the time their kids are growing up, they would have better, you know, they can make a more informed decision. And उस time पे मुझे याद है कि like one of the things that we focused on, because like a lot of relevant people who were helping with that, was that you teach kids coding. And that was the way forward for the future. Now, 5-6 years down the line, I was reading somewhere that coding is not something that kids should be learning now. So what it means to the education reforms programs that are running in our country or worldwide, how can we succeed our kids, whatever they're studying in the schools these days? How do we ensure that by the time they're ready to join professions, whatever they're learning right now is relevant by that time?
I think that's a great question. देखिए इसमें ये है कि I'm actually a conservative on these issues. उसका मकसद ये है, अगर आपने याद हो, मैसिव ऑनलाइन कोर्सेज आए थे, मूक्स, उन्होंने कहा बस यूनिवर्सिटीज़ ख़त्म हो गई हैं. नहीं हुई. एंड वी ऑफन हर्ड दिस थिंग कि यार अगर आप एरिस्टोटल के ज़माने में चले जाते हैं और आप उनके क्लासरूम में चले जाते हैं और आज के क्लासरूम, वो लगभग एक ही चीज़ है. वही डेस्क शेस्क सीट्स हैं, सम लेवल ऑफ ब्लैक बोर्ड है और बंदा है वो सिखा रहा होता है. एंड दे से दिस एज अ बैड थिंग कि यू नो चेंज नहीं आया. बट आईड आर्ग्यू कि दैट्स नॉट अ बैड थिंग. वी हैव सीन अ सिस्टम इन दैट इट वर्क्स. अब देखें, जैसे कोडिंग था, इट वाज वन थिंग. अब हम देख रहे हैं कि ऑटोमेटेड कोडिंग हो गया. कोडिंग इज़ नाउ बिकम लाइक अ मच लोअर लेवल थिंग दैट कैन बी ऑटोमेटेड थ्रू दीज AI systems. What is it going to be important for kids in the future? Or I'd argue some of those things have never changed and never will. One is जो आपकी basic numeracy है, you're still going to need reading, writing, arithmetic. ये तो आपको हर हालत में सीखना होगा. इवन देखें कैलकुलेटर तो 50 साल से यहाँ हमारे साथ है, बट वी स्टिल नीड टू नो द फंडामेंटल्स ऑफ हाउ basic math works. You have things like Grammarly, you have things like now ChatGPT. But the more these things write for you, आपको एक dichotomy आ जाएगी जब आपका writing level by automation is much higher, but you still will have to have in-person interactions. तो अगर वो उस level की नहीं होंगी, you will not proceed ahead in life. And actually to become better or to assess whether आपका जो AI product है as a student is giving you good things, you have to be literate at some level.
Right.
To know कि ये चीज़ ठीक है या नहीं है. So I would argue कि in the future still we need the basics of जो ये 3 R's हम कहते हैं, arithmetic, reading and writing. I would still say कि one of the big things in the future is how do you get kids in classrooms to collaborate more?
Right.
Because functionally our future is not imperiled by technology. It's imperiled by human behavior. So you've got now challenges that are global. They're no longer national. So if we're going to fix climate change as an existential threat, it's got to be countries working together.
Right.
जो आपकी some countries will have myopic views कि मेरी तो ये इंडस्ट्री ख़राब हो रही है, मेरी माइनिंग ख़राब हो रही है, मेरी एक्सट्रैक्शन ख़राब हो रही है. वो लाइक ठीक है, आपने 60 साल का इसका रिसोर्स एक्सट्रैक्शन कर लेंगे, लेकिन किसको बेचेंगे जब पूरी दुनिया ख़राब हो जाएगी. Again, we're seeing online there's an atomization, a polarization in society. Again, so I'd argue कि जो schools हैं, you know, one of the key things is, and that is the function of a school, is socialization.
Yeah.
बच्चे जानवर होते हैं, right? They're cute, they're fluffy, ठीक है ना? लेकिन if you don't take care of them or whatever, you know, some are inherently good, but they can become bad because that, you know, परवरिश का बहुत बड़ा हाथ होता है. And then the school is a stand-in for parents as well, because there's a custodial function जो दिन में बहुत सारे टाइम आप वहाँ रहते हैं. तो हम अक्सर कहते हैं skills and things like that. अब तो skills, frankly, the other thing that I think schools need to do is that, you know, we're always wondering कि यार, are they being taught what's going to be important 5 years in the future? ये prediction बहुत मुश्किल होता है.
Right.
And you get a national system to do that, उसमें मुश्किलात आ जाती हैं because it might not turn out to be true.
Right.
मुझे याद है 2000 में ना पूरा मुल्क जो है ना वो Microsoft certification और Oracle बस ये future है, right? And you know the future, it's important, but it's turned out to be different. What needs to be taught is kids being able to self-learn.
Right.
Self-learning automatically नहीं आती. And we're seeing it, मैं अक्सर ये कहता हूँ कि देखिए जो हमारे uncles हैं सारे, they're saying really ridiculous things because they don't know how to distinguish between good information and WhatsApp पे जो भी मिल जाता है believe कर लेते हैं. So there's a need for schools to establish like not just the basic elements, but the idea that they need to have an understanding of collaboration. They need to have an understanding of socialization. Then they also need to be able to have the digital literacy to assess the quality of information. And then just the idea of self-learning. Because ultimately, you know, in your career, my career, there's so many things that we weren't trained for. But a good teacher, a good attitude towards knowledge or access or learning, we were able to learn those things without having to go to university again to retrain and things like that. So अब ये resources available है, and I think that's one function that is changed. But I would argue कि now in Pakistan, maybe Pakistan reform system जो है ना, वो I think some of the things you and I are discussing now are a bit too far-fetched because हमने basics ही नहीं solve किया अभी तक.
Right.
In many ways there have been great achievements, you know, लेकिन अभी भी there's a need to fix teachers, the curriculum, there's a need to teach how classroom pedagogy is done. There's a lot of good work that's happened. I think schools today are much better, government schools, than they were 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And there are huge problems. लेकिन ये जो बातें मैं कर रहा हूँ, like वो बातें we can actually address these also simultaneously, but जो पाकिस्तान की critical core issues है वो they still remain. अगर आप बाहर के मुल्कों में बात कर रहे हैं, I mean I still think that Um, some of the Scandinavian countries and others, they've got it right because they're creating kids who, at least through the system, are being taught the value of differences, they're taught the value of living in coexistence. Because this is not just a belief, it's also a skill. Agar aap kisi negotiation, you and I disagree on something, the ability to come out where both don't get what they want, but we're able to live with one another is a massive skill. It's a negotiation tactic that needs to be taught. It's not something inherent to us. I mean, broadly, I would be concerned about these things.
Right. And so when it comes to like the assessment systems in schools,
Haan.
so because like a lot of education of the children, that is influenced by how their parents want them to pursue it.
Haan.
So a lot of parents would still think that, you know, when it comes to assessment, तो मेरा बच्चा जो है उसके marks ज़्यादा आए स्कूल
हाँ.
में, first position आए, second position आए, regardless of the social skills that needs to be inculcated in that age.
Haan.
So you as a parent, like what advice would you give to your child to like focus on getting the first position in the class, or like having better social skills and make more friends?
Okay, so I think that, I'll explain this a little differently. Like, one of the big skills that kids need in the future, and this is not particularly scientific, it's a bit of a hypothesis. वो ये है कि, how do you delay consumption or reward? You see, when you give kids a phone too early, and they can do whatever they want with it, they are immediately getting dopamine in their heads because they see something funny, and they're putting off things that are not, you know, that rewarding. Like actually working towards your school, you know, fixing up your room, which are all important things because zindagi aapne eventually karni hai. So those kids, and one of the things that I found interesting is like Bill Gates' children, Steve Jobs ke bachche, 4, 5 of all the big ones, they don't give their kids devices.
Right.
And what they're trying to do is that ke unko, unke jo brains hai na, they don't seek cheap dopamine, which is just coming from a flux of entertainment and getting what you want immediately. Because life is not like that.
Right.
You can't pursue pleasure endlessly. You're going to have to do work and things like that. And I'm not saying it also, I mean, I also love devices and I love wasting time and things like that. Lekin ye jo training hai abhi. So now if you can get kids who can still read books,
Yeah.
if you can get kids who can still spend time, I mean, I find this fascinating. They can't spend time alone with one another. They need something to do. They need to engage something all the time. Whereas a lot of imagination is actually developed with free time. You don't need to put them in activities all the time. So, I mean, I guess, aapka sawal hai, what I'd argue here is that we need to ensure that some of the more basic things and trendy things that we'll miss out and all that. So to a child, what's really important from the ages of, 1 to 10, I would say, is that aap usse confidence do. So aap unko confidence do, they need to know that they're loved.
Yeah.
And that your love as a parent is not contingent upon them ticking these boxes. Exam mein theek aaya hu, ye wo. Obviously, you have to, lay down the law every so often ki insaan ban, ye kaam karo, ye wo.
Because like I think unconditional love, that also spoils the kid.
Usme apne masle hote hain. But you see, like ye कहना है कि, grade 1 se, they're developing their minds. And if you wonder, okay, let's say the future is all about you being able to think, about you being able to bring something original to the table, because now all your manual works like accountancy, ye ab ye systems aapke liye kar rahe hain.
Yeah.
So for that, you're going to have to develop a certain orientation where the child can reflectively think, is interested in many things, seeks information, is able to do things on time. So I would argue is ke like, it's neither. It's like you have to say, look, doing your best is important. We're also limited by genetics. Some kid is never going to come first in calculus. Some kid is never going to be great at writing a poem. But there's enough work to go around कि जो भी आपका हो you can, and you need to give the kid that degree of confidence कि वो हो सकता है. So coming back to what was the other choice, one was getting good grades and the other was
like make more friends, like socializing, so collaborative skills.
that's just it, right? मैं जो अक्सर कहता हूँ is there are very few things that are true binaries कि ये या ये. You need both. And हम जब कहते हैं कि like people who do well in careers, they're usually much more well-rounded. They're outliers है, that Malcolm Gladwell book. तो उसमें एक case study है, अभी Oppenheimer film भी आई है. If I'm remembering correctly in the book, okay, it was about Oppenheimer. And there's a guy who has the highest IQ in the world right now.
Remember, it was about Oppenheimer.
It was about Oppenheimer. And there's a guy who has the highest IQ in the world and he's doing terribly in life. Because उसकी socialization skills ही नहीं. And Oppenheimer का एक फ़ायदा ये था कि like he came from a well-to-do family. He knew how to talk. He knew how to get things, even though he had his own. So यही binary का यही मसला होता है. Is that, you know, even if you're the smartest guy in the world, but you can't work with anyone.
Yeah.
Nothing. Even if you're the funniest guy in the world and you're high-fiving everyone in the room, but you have nothing to contribute, आपकी भी progression रुक जाएगी. So ये जो binaries है ना, that's the problem. We're going to have to develop children who have an interest in everything. But the one thing I would argue is कि what is probably a big determinant, again, ये मेरा hypothesis है, I haven't really read the research on this, but I think children who feel loved, who feel cared for and listened to, they probably end up doing better.
Right.
And they'll probably end up listening more.
And that's also primarily because like they can be more flexible, they would have lower resistance to any change, and they can, you know, collaborate better.
I mean, I don't know if it's these things, but I do feel that if you give them that confidence, right? So I think they won't see failure as such a big thing that they don't even do anything.
Right.
उनको फिर भी पता है कि ठीक है यहाँ बोंगी कर ली, सब हंस गए हैं, लेकिन घर पे I still have, you know, some love to come back to and things like that. You see, children can't work with perpetual instability. So school does have an element of instability where you have to prove yourself and things like that. They need to feel that they've got a place they belong. And so I'm just speaking, I'm not talking about systems or whatever, I'm just talking about parents and things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, but again, it's a hypothesis of mine. It's not something, for example, there कुछ तो genetic gifts भी होते हैं.
Yeah.
You know, there are kids who have like zero advantages in life, terrible home life, no money, no home, whatever, and they're like the top and everything. The problem with those kids is like, we use them as examples for everyone else. Those are exceptions. The real ones are the 80% who are the average.
I remember like once you mentioned about this thing कि like वहीं every now and then कोई ना कोई ऐसी example आती है कि out like slums में से कोई बच्चा जिसके parents जो हैं वो they are struggling but still that kid like comes out and like top कर लेता है board में या they do really well. So those outliers are going to be there anyway.
So I remember discussing that with you और मेरा point ये होता है कि like जब भी मैं ये article पढ़ता हूँ कि रिक्शे ड्राइवर के बेटे ने अब टॉप कर लिया MBBS में, I think that has a really bad effect on people's perceptions.
Right.
Because what it sends people as the message, और ये elderly लोग करते हैं कि तुम क्यों नहीं कर सकते ये वो, because what it also does is that it suggests that the system is working perfectly. कि somebody with nothing वो फिर भी पहुंच गया. But that kid is genuinely such an exception, such a mind, and even if you gave him nothing, he would still do well. जो भी system होता है, the system has to be geared towards the average student, who's 80% of the bulk, yeah, 60%, or the lowest rung as well. Most rickshaw drivers' children will not get beyond a certain point. They'll have severe disadvantages. अंग्रेजी के और चीज़ों के, you know, fee देने के, and उसका मसला यही होता है कि वो it automatically कि अगर ये कर सकते हैं तो ये सब कर सकते हैं और ये नहीं कर रहे इसलिए कि ये इतना काम नहीं कर रहे. Not true at all. ये बस वही है कि एक advantage होता है genetic there's a certain kind of brilliance. तो वो stories जब मैं देखता हूँ मेरा अक्सर यही मतलब एक दफ़ा I was speaking to some doctors और उन्होंने कहा कि यार हमारा system बहुत अच्छा हो गया. मैं कहा क्यों? यही जो फेलोशिप्स होते हैं पाकिस्तान के अंदर और वो ये कह रहे थे कि अब वही एग्जांपल था कि कैंटीन वाले के बेटे ने अब FRCS स्टॉप किया. तो आई वाज ट्राइंग टू से कि लेट्स इंटेरोगेट दिस. मैं कहा अगेन दीज आर बाय द वे वी डिडंट हैव डेटा और एनीथिंग. मैं कहा बहुत से लोग तो FRCS के लिए जाते हैं और MD के लिए जाते हैं, तो ये तो आपके पूल से निकल गए. एंड अ लॉट ऑफ दीज आर ऑलरेडी द टॉप परफॉर्मर्स. तो जो रह जाते हैं देयर इज अ स्मॉलर कंट्रैक्शन, मे बी दे नॉट द एब्सोल्यूट बेस्ट. देन यू नो यही जो एक बंदा है, हाउ मेनी अदर किड्स ऑफ द सेम बैकग्राउंड could move? Do you think कि ये इसलिए है कि ये इतने काबिल नहीं है, ये मेहनत नहीं करे? तो उनके थोड़ा बहुत सोच तो यही था. तो बट आई वॉज फैसिनेटेड कि उस बंदे ने उस एक लड़के की वजह से he made an inference that the system is very healthy, which I don't think is true.
So a lot of professions in the future that when we read about them. So for example, I was reading when Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers. I got to know that maybe in the future the legal system may also can also be automized. So we may not require lawyers at some point in time. We may not require a lot of doctors because of a lot of advancement in the health system as well. Then accountants जो हैं वो भी those jobs will be compromised. Like I remember growing up यही होता था कि या डॉक्टर बन जाओ या इंजीनियर बन जाओ. So for those parents who would now actively look to guide their kids कि what sort of profession they opt for in the future, what mindset should they have?
I mean, I think it's a difficult question because वही मैं कहता हूँ कि फ्यूचर प्रिडिक्ट करना बहुत ही मुश्किल होता है. इतने अनएक्सपेक्टेड चीज़ें हैं. लेकिन एक जो इसमें एक ट्रेडिशनल मसला है वो तो अभी भी आई थिंक is something that we have to think about. वो ये है कि every person can't do any profession. We have certain advantages when we are pushed. So अगर आप I mean I guess if I was in my BA या FSC और मुझे आप कहते कि यार सबसे ज़्यादा पैसे एक्चुअरीज बनाते हैं, which is like these statistical geniuses जो आपको रिस्क करते हैं इंश्योरेंस के लिए, तू वो बन जा. वो तो मुझे पता है कि मैं तो 2 दिन बाद मैं कहा कि ये भाई का वो नहीं है, भाई का लेवल का काम नहीं है, मैं तो बहुत ही लो हूँ. सो एक तो ये है कि लाइक फिगरिंग आउट के इंटरेस्ट किस चीज़ का है. दूसरा ये है कि इंस्टिलिंग which will not change in the future is your ability to work hard, your ability to read widely, your ability to think. But like medicine में, for example, medicine में maybe a lot of more lower order OPD type things will be outsourced. Even if you have robotics, आप बिल्कुल autonomous तो नहीं छोड़ सकते an operation. You'll have some human oversight. Maybe ये change उसमें आ जाएगा. इंजीनियरिंग में बहुत चेंज आ जाएगा. लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स कुड पोटेंशली बी ऑटोमेटेड. बट अगेन जहाँ पे क्रिएटिविटी आती है कि बिल्डिंग कुछ और किस्म का या उसमें कोई और फंक्शंस. बट वी ऑलरेडी सीन इन अकाउंटेंसी में ये इफेक्ट्स बहुत पहले आए थे, 10-15 साल. वो एक बुक कीपिंग फंक्शन होता था, वो तो सारा ऑटोमेट हो गया है. तो अकाउंटेंट्स बिकेम मच मोर एज एडवाइजर्स, as analysts, आपकी financial health, what are the potential. Then they also started making a mix with certain other things. So if you look at some accountancy firms, like they're also giving you legal advice. You're looking at potential ways of how to structure your money, how to keep money, taxes, things like that. तो जो मुझे डर लग रहा है ऑफ द फ्यूचर वो ये है कि जो लोअर ऑर्डर काम है जिसमें ज़रा मैनुअल इनपुट ड्रिवन, वो काफ़ी हद तक कंट्रैक्ट हो जाएंगे. एंड जो ज़रा मिडल टीयर और अपर टीयर है वो दे विल चेंज बट दे विल एग्जिस्ट इन सम फॉर्म्स. तो उसमें अगर आप बच्चे की सोच रहे हैं कि फ्यूचर में क्या है, सो देन आई वुड आर्ग्यू कि यू हैव टू मेक देम इनटू बिट ऑफ अ थिंकर. यू हैव टू टीच देम अगेन सेल्फ लर्निंग कॉन्सेप्ट्स. बिकॉज अगर इन द पास्ट 2 years इतनी एडवांसमेंट्स आई है, सो इमेजिन एज chips become better, the rate of technological progress will keep increasing.
Right.
तो उसमें यही होगा, we are going to have to play catch up at all points.
Right.
We're going to have to keep learning what it is. So to predict now would be difficult, but at least जो essential skills है जो हमें पता है
Right.
कि whether there is AI technology or not, ये हमें एनालॉग वर्ल्ड में भी इस्तेमाल करने, डिजिटल वर्ल्ड में भी इस्तेमाल करने, वी हैव टू कीप एट इट.
Right. And what do you think about like the impact it could have on the creative field? So I was like having a conversation with Sarmad Ghafoor once, and he had a really good point. Ke even like automated images could still be made, but let's say a painting, it can never replace a painting of Da Vinci. Let's say. So what do you think inherently could this affect the creative fields as well?
I think he's absolutely right. Nothing can replace a Da Vinci, but आप ये भी देखें कि Da Vinci has had 400, 600 years, whatever, to establish his reputation. अब मैं dates भूल गया हूँ कि Renaissance कब था, लेकिन there's a limited supply in the field, and it's in the context of that. लेकिन there's also no reason not to believe कि online भी, like अभी NFTs आई थी art के, obviously वो market crash हो गई है, but वो भी थी. I've been hearing a couple of AI rendered songs with Rafi's voice into some other things.
Yeah. I've also listened to those, like,
And
really
they're amazing.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is that I actually would consider listening to those regularly.
Yeah.
Some of them are really good.
Yeah.
So, I don't think like the human element will be taken out, but again, the art field will also mimic some of the loss that exists. के इसमें problem ये है ना कि not every musician, artist crosses that threshold into timelessness. Like आप देखें हर साल there must be a lakh or even more बहुत ज़्यादा songs होंगे that are released.
Yeah.
How many make it? Very few. Now that's not a function of there's not enough listeners. Maybe maybe not all of them deserve to make it.
Right.
ठीक है? But it still requires a certain level of skill. What if we can automatically AI उसमें proficient हो जाता है?
Yeah.
So there will be an effect. I do agree that top creatives will not be affected.
Yeah.
And over time, this will be, something that's difficult to assess because already जो चीज़ें निकल की आई हैं, what we would argue is a very early inception of AI. Some of it is so sophisticated. जो आखिरी 2 माह में मैंने देखे, like अभी now we're actually measuring in months, right?
Right.
उसकी जो iterations आ रही हैं, दूसरी companies आ रही हैं, So I know of one director in Pakistan who's doing commercial film work. TVCs. So he has put 2-3 AI generated bits into his film, his TVCs already.
Right.
So what does that mean? That means somebody's work was just cut out, right? Editor.
So a job lost somewhere.
Somewhere down the chain. Or वो जो extreme position है, that I agree that won't happen. Like humans का कोई काम ही नहीं होगा. Because eventually you might think if they're all using the same data sets, the same learning means, तो कुछ similarity तो आएगी.
Right.
And then एक चीज़ जो humans have shown with some proficiency is like, मुझे याद है जब हम music सुनते थे, there was heavy metal, फिर grunge आ गया, फिर उसके बाद, वो आ गया, new metal आ गया, things like that. I mean, there were iterations, changes that kept coming.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the health of the system is such, like these days is very poor, at least for rock and things like that. But I still think, human beings will have that role. Whether it will be enough for the whole stream of musicians or not, that's a big question.
And some of the other professions, so for example, once we have like the driverless cars, so that will probably deprive a lot of drivers from their jobs. So a lot of professions, for example, once we have the driverless cars that are already now coming in, so maybe millions of drivers are going to lose their jobs. And so as the other white collar, blue collar jobs as well. Do you think like in the future we are going to see more inequity? Because like a lot of these millions of these people who wouldn't have any other skill, what exactly are they going to do?
This is really interesting. I've thought about this. I mean, I have really no ideas. I mean, I've read other people's ideas, and it's interesting. ये किस तरह से हल होगा? एक वही है UBI, यूनिवर्सल बेसिक इनकम. उसमें जो सवालात मेरे जहन में आते हैं, एक तो ये है कि probably what will happen is कि जो tail होगा of current inequity will become much longer.
Right.
मतलब ये कि अगर नौकरियां कम हो गई, ऑटोमेशन ज़्यादा हो गया, so people already have a lot of assets.
Yeah.
They will continue to have those assets. So वो आपकी अभी से oligarchy है, वो it will cement itself into the future. दूसरा जो है वो ये है कि अगर UBI आ गया, यूनिवर्सल बेसिक इनकम, तो उसमें ये है कि I mean I've wondered कि how do economies grow?
Yeah.
Because then it's dependent on the state pumping in a certain amount of consumption is then oriented towards that. Growth value कहाँ से आएगा? If it's only coming from tech firms, तो वो भी एक लिमिट तक होगा. Like these massive sized, अगर 10 साल या 15 साल पहले आपने कहा कि $1 trillion firm होगा, you'd be like नहीं, अब इतने चंद तो है.
Yeah.
I think Apple was the first.
Yeah.
और तो ये जो है, आई थिंक अगेन द थिंग जो मेरा इंटरेस्ट है वो ये कि पीपल वरी अबाउट द एडवांसमेंट ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी एंड इट्स इनहेरेंट डेंजर्स. मेरा जो हमेशा डर होता है इज नो, इट्स लाइक इट्स एक्चुअली द बिहेवियर ऑफ ह्यूमंस दैट यू हैव टू वरी अबाउट. यू हैव टू वरी अबाउट द इफेक्ट्स ऑन सोसाइटी. तो सोशल मीडिया को तो हमने देख लिया. आई मीन आई वाज रीडिंग अ पीस द अदर डे कि जितना जल्दी आप बच्चे को मोबाइल फ़ोन दे देते हैं, व्हाट इज़ द कॉरस्पॉन्डेंट इंक्रीज इन मेंटल हेल्थ इश्यूज. सो अगेन अगर नौकरियाँ ना हो, नाउ द थिंग अबाउट नौकरियाँ इज़ लाइक अगर मेरी नौकरी ना होती ना, मैं शावर हर चौथे दिन लेता, मैं 2 बजे उठता, स्लीपर्स हर जगह पहनता, आई वुडंट शेव, आई वुडंट फिक्स थिंग्स, इट्स माई नेचर. और बट आई वंडर कि ऐसे कितने लोग होते हैं. नौकरी गिव्स पीपल पर्पस, स्ट्रक्चर, इट गिव्स. अच्छा, उसमें भी फिर यूटोपियन सोच आ जाती है. ये जो सारे हैं ना, ये फिर आर्ट बनाएंगे, ये म्यूज़िक सीखेंगे, ये फ़लसफ़ा करेंगे. आई डोंट थिंक दैट इज़ ऑटोमेटिक.
Right.
इसमें आपके सोशल टेंशन्स बढ़ जाएंगे.
Yeah.
हाउ डू यू मेक पीपल हैव पर्पस? ये जो सबसे ये तो बहुत, आई मीन हमारे भी दोस्त हैं, रिश्तेदार हैं, उनका कोई शौक ही नहीं है हायर पर्पस का.
Yeah.
उनका कोई सेल्फ एक्चुअलाइजेशन लेवल जब आप बात करते हैं, वो ये कहते हैं बस घर हो, पैसा हो, अयाशी हो, उसके अपने इफेक्ट्स होते हैं. सो आई मीन दिस इज़ वन दैट आई फाइंड वेरी डिफ़िकल्ट टू इमेजिन.
Yeah.
बिकॉज जो मेरा शक है कि जो यूटोपियन सोच है कि हर चीज़ लाला लैंड बच जाएगी,
Yeah.
अब आपको काम नहीं करना, घर पे पैसे आएंगे और आप जो है एक दानिश्वर बन जाएंगे. आई डोंट थिंक दैट्स गोना हैपन.
Yeah. And what effect do you think it could have on social structures, especially like in the backdrop of population collapse? We don't have the same family sizes. A lot of countries, unki jo population है वो negative में. Japan is losing like 600,000 people every year.
हाँ.
Same as I think Italy में भी ऐसे ही है. और Pakistan में भी I think the trends are there. So what do you think, like once we have this automation, AI, we are not socially as connected, we have smaller family sizes as well. How do you see that, like how it's going to affect overall quality of life?
So I think that's a great question. उसका ये है कि एक तो फैमिली स्ट्रक्चर जो है, आई थिंक I've read it in some places, especially in Europe, the epidemic of the future is loneliness.
Right.
And उसका ये है, as you grow older, you become more infirm, आपको support तो चाहिए होती है. And they've discovered that if you have strong relationships, you have engagement, it has very significant health benefits. It also affects like some of the worst things that can happen to you, which is really bad depression and things like that. So uska solution to obviously is something that needs to be made. how do you get people to remain connected? In one way is जो हमारा जो alternative आ गया है, which is the internet and things like that. तो उसमें problem ये है कि they're not the same quality of relationships, right? A digital level of engagement, you might have it around certain issues, which gives you purpose and things like that, but it's not the same as real relations. And maybe the key is translating digital relationships into real life ones, friendships and things like that. लेकिन जो population collapse है,
Yeah.
that's a very interesting one because to be honest, I haven't really studied it that much. Obviously, उसके 2-3 पहलू है which are very important. और ये है कि जब आपका population collapse हो जाता है, तो आपके पास बहुत कम young लोग होते हैं to take care of an aging population.
Right.
दूसरा ये है कि उसमें एजिंग पॉपुलेशन जो होता है उसकी कॉस्ट ज़्यादा बढ़ जाती है बिकॉज उनकी प्रोडक्टिविटी कम हो जाती है, रिटायरमेंट, एंड देन यू नीड टू टेक केयर ऑफ देम. वो कहाँ से आएगा उसका पैसा? वो यही होगा फ्रॉम द यंग,
Right.
taxing them or having them to work. That puts undue pressure. स्टेट की वाइबिलिटी कम हो जाती है, उसकी जो ओवरऑल इकोनॉमिक पाई है वो इट स्टार्ट्स डिफ्लेटिंग, श्रिंकिंग. अच्छा, but I think these are real problems.
Right.
But the flip side is also a real problem. Unfettered growth. The world keeps growing, chasing GDP numbers. उसमें consumption होती है, उसमें pillaging of resources होती है. Some of those are not renewable, yeah, they take time, whether it's like forests, things like that. तो ये भी हमने ज़रा देखना होगा. So I can see the problem of a population collapse, but it's not a terrible thing to have a smaller world that isn't chasing growth all the time.
Yeah.
If you can find a more equitable distribution, if you can find a way of getting people to live together.
Yeah.
तो वो जो एक it's almost like a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
Keep growing and economies are healthy and we'll consume.
Yeah.
And ये जो sufficient, I mean, we found oil, right?
Yeah.
And the world suddenly changed. And people's incomes changed because we were essentially getting billions of years of decomposition from the earth becoming, liquid gold for people. And it's like energy coming out that we haven't really created or put effort into.
Yeah.
तो उसका तो आप अपना ही, I mean, if climate change was in there, उसका एक अपना eventually तो आना था, if like let's say renewables had not come along. So I'm just wondering इसमें ये जो population collapse का issue है, देखें आप, एक ये तो है कि now we've got freedom, people are choosing individualism.
Yeah.
They're not interested in the constraints of marriage. They're not interested in the constraints of family to some degree. They're pursuing, what they want, and that's their choice.
Right.
लेकिन again मुझे जो डर है is that वो जो एक the crisis framing of a population collapse is mainly in terms of the economy. I just wonder is that maybe there is a way around it, and maybe it's inevitable, and maybe the earth should be with less people, and ultimately, I mean, I think we're the kind of species who will drive ourselves to extinction. Right. Whether it's by population collapse, whether it's through, climate change, whether it's through nuclear war.
Right.
Because जो हम देख रहे हैं, especially in the past decade, वो ये है कि जो order हमने थोड़ा बहुत बनाया, वो तो बिगड़ गया है, वो तो break हो रहा है. And some of the more naked geopolitical power games जो exist करती थी, वर्ल्ड वॉर 2 में, वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 में, कोल्ड वॉर में, जो कुछ हद तक आफ्टर द कोलैप्स ऑफ द सोवियत एम्पायर वी थॉट कि बस ठीक है, अब जो ऑर्डर है वो फिर वापस आ रहा है. एंड इफ वी हैवंट बीन एबल टू लिसन टू दोज और लर्न फ्रॉम दोज लेसन्स, तो मे बी देयर इज अ स्लाइट इनएविटेबिलिटी in where we're heading to.
Yeah. And also I think like historically, if you also study maybe like when to pre-ancient times, it feels like there has been a lot of times where we reached to that level where we had sophisticated civilizations, but somehow we just lost that knowledge. I mean, if you take example of Egypt, jo uski civilization and all of that. So, I mean, we don't know what happens in the future.
नहीं तो ये है, I mean, sometimes if you read the works of the collected works of the three great philosophers, right, from ancient Greece, you're astounded कि ये किस किस्म का सोच था और इसके बाद क्या जानवरपना आया.
I was like really surprised to know like their senators का जो उनका system था, they didn't have like monarchy for a very long time.
हाँ, नहीं, I mean, even if you just read their ideas, right, the way they were thinking about the world, and sometimes I find it like almost contemporary in the way they framed it. लेकिन जो बात है वो यही है कि ये जो I guess in my lifetime मैंने देखा है कि बस enlightenment आ गई है.
Yeah.
अब जो है ना बस अब इसके बाद वो जो हमारा वो बचपन है एक
तो
दूसरे से-
2000 साल पहले भी उनको भी यही लगता था कि
उनको
अब-
भी यही लगता था और collapse आ गई. That's why like out of all of these things like population collapse मुझे मैं कहता हूँ बस ठीक है हो जाए.
in terms of so we've been like discussing Bitcoin since a long time. I think 2016 was the year when for the first time we and I wish I'd taken your advice. I was more interested in mining, but your advice कि नहीं, the coin itself could be more valuable. Anyway, but do you think like और
ये
पाकिस्तान
तुम्हारे
में
बच्चे तुझे कहेंगे.
लेकिन मैं ये कहूँगा कुछ फायदा मैंने उठाया.
हाँ कुछ किया था. हाँ
तो
मैंने तो खैर कुछ नहीं किया, मैं तो वैसे ही बस बक रहा था कि ये करो वो करो. हाँ.
even right now I think like January का you told me कि like
हाँ.
prices are going to go up
हाँ.
and they have.
हाँ. हाँ.
The question is कि एक तो खैर पाकिस्तान में I feel like कि हमारा सिस्टम ऐसा है कि जब हमें एक चीज़ की समझ नहीं आती तो हम पहली चीज़ कहते हैं इसको बैन कर दो. So I think that's true in Bitcoin's case as well, whereas in the world it's like sort of like world is opening up to it. So two questions. Do you think like Bitcoin could be the currency of the future, and can everybody in the world be rich?
So I think that Bitcoin will never be the currency of the future. I just don't think it's possible. It takes a long time उसके transactions करने. दूसरा ये है कि like why would I buy or sell something in Bitcoin if I know कि यार ये तो जो अभी $10 की चीज़ मैं ले रहा हूँ तो मेरा Bitcoin शायद अगले माह will increase so much in value
Right.
कि ये तो मुझे बहुत कम पड़ जाएगा. I mean that's one problem is like
So
the
stability नहीं है.
stability नहीं है. दूसरा ये है कि Bitcoin has evolved into something unanticipated. It was designed as a currency कि अब हम trading इसी पे करेंगे, but it's become a store of value. It's become digital gold because इसकी absolute limit है कि कितने होंगे. 21 million होंगे. Every time it becomes more difficult. It's got like anti-inflation built into it so that there's some rise. So that's why I don't think it's ever going to be. It's become a sort of prized upper tier rare metal commodity like gold, like platinum, and people are putting money into it. और इसका ये है कि I think there's going to be a period of significant rise for a number of years because more people will get into it. पहले ये वॉलेट्स करना ये मुश्किल काम थे, लोगों को कहाँ पता होता है पेंशनर्स को ये कैसे, बट दे नो हाउ टू डू इट विद ETFs एंड थिंग्स लाइक दैट. So I mean I think as an investment I'm sure it's going to be hugely volatile, but I think people will do well with it. Will it make everyone rich? I think I'm sure there's going to be a massive speculative bubble and people will hold on to it. The one issue जो मुझे लग रहा है कि like right now it looks like you can't break Bitcoin, but with the amount, I mean it was designed in a period where there was a certain understanding of tech and possibilities and what exists. But if you have things like quantum computers at some point, if you have more powerful software, AI systems, तो एक तो ये है कि what if they couldn't break the encryption, what if they can break the network. ये vulnerabilities तो है. एक लिहाज में गोल्ड और अदर एसेट क्लासेस में उस तरह से तो नहीं है. इट्स ऑल्सो डिफिकल्ट स्टोरिंग गोल्ड एंड होल्डिंग गोल्ड, बट somebody really has to make an effort to come into your house and do it, whereas in this it might be और ये vulnerabilities पहले भी नज़र आई हैं because where they were being held at exchanges, those got hacked. the number of bitcoins got taken out. I don't actually understand, the wallet system and things like that very well. Lekin I think Bitcoin is an asset class. It's a store of value. Its inherent limited nature will keep it at some level, maybe not at the levels it suddenly rises to and falls to, but I don't think it'll make everybody rich.
Right. But theoretically, can everybody be rich at any point in time in the future, do you think? So, like, kaise possible hai? Because, like, I was listening to one other podcast, Joe Rogan Pay. I forgot who was the guest, but he mentioned that everybody can be rich. But I think, like, that somehow contradicts the overall concept of money itself.
So, I mean, I'm wondering, I haven't heard this, but I'm wondering if that idea of wealth comes from a surplus of technology. So let's say energy costs become next to zero when renewables become very efficient at capturing the sun, that those panels last for a long time. So what if we have a world with a surplus of energy? तो सबके घर में बिजली हो. It costs next to nothing. If we have the ability to, create food with much higher yields, things like that. If we have technology, the degree of our chips become faster, cheaper, like they have over 30, 40 years with Moore's law and things like that. So yeah, we could be rich in that respect. के एक लिहाज से, capitalism, I would argue, it's brought its own kind of communism. And what I mean by that is के अमेरिका में, the super rich and the poor, उनके घरों में तो एक ही चीज़ें होती हैं.
Yeah.
उसके घर में, गरीब के घर में 45 इंच टीवी है, अमीर के 85 इंच है. They have a sound system, they both have cars. So there are deprivations and real poverty, but I'm just saying is कि like the amount of, let's say, वो जो technologically induced provision of, services and consumption, I'm wondering if that's the thing. I think in that respect, maybe people could be rich.
I think it is also about the perspective. So once you mentioned, for example, the lives that we are living right now, maybe 500 years ago, the quality or the facilities that we have.
तो किंग के पास भी नहीं थे.
बादशाह के पास भी नहीं. So उस point of view से अगर देखा जाए तो आज कल के ज़माने में, like in terms of facilities, you have like अगर supply of water coming, if you have like servants, if you have food is served to you 2-3 times a day, and you can predict that you're going to have, in next few weeks or days as well. So उस टाइम के साथ अगर कंपैरिजन करें तो दैट इज़ लाइक वी कैन कॉल दैट समबडी फ्रॉम दिस टाइम. आजकल के ज़माने में ही इज़ रिच कंपेयर टू जो फैसिलिटीज़ उस टाइम पे अवेलेबल थी. सो लाइक इन टर्म्स ऑफ फैसिलिटीज़, इन टर्म्स ऑफ क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ, आई मीन उसके सेंस में हम कह सकते हैं कि मे बी एवरीबडी कैन बी रिच, बट नॉट, बिकॉज लाइक देन अगेन इट्स अबाउट परस्पेक्टिव हाउ यू सी दैट.
हाँ, and also it depends on like how the nature of public goods will change. So for example, पहले जिसके पास dial-up connection था, he was better off than everyone else because he had to pay for every increment. अब Wi-Fi आ गया, and eventually I foresee कि Wi-Fi will become a public good. कि you'll have the state pumping it out, सबको access होगा, सबका अपना होगा. Let's say अभी you have to pay for health. If there's sufficient technological advancement, everyone will have an option to get at least the most basic done at a very high level. If you have genetic disadvantages, like if you've got mutations, if you've got diseases coming, uski cures aa jaye. So maybe wealth is the wrong word to use. I think what we're talking about is that we're talking about whether you could be well off at a level that you don't have. You will have a difference of the degree to which you have something, but you all have fundamentally the same thing attached. That may be possible in the future. But again, like, if you look at a really technologically advanced country, Israel ko dekh lo.
Yeah.
Supremely technological. I mean, they've punched above their weight class. Lekin jo wo Gaza mein kar rahe hain. Now, that shows you a poverty of mindset. It shows you a poverty of humanity and things like that. So I mean, I do believe that eventually there will be a diffusion of technology that will benefit most people and it will bring some differences out. But jab tak societies cannot come together and agree, because a lot of things can be solved if we choose to. अब हम सब्सिडी हमने दी है पीआईए को 10-15 साल, 30 साल हो गए वेयर पीपल डोंट हैव नेशनल कैरियर्स. वो दैट वाज अ मैटर ऑफ प्राइड 40 years ago. किसी मुल्क का अपना एयरलाइन हो. We've been pumping money into this. Like, with that money, what could you have solved?
Right.
And, it's largely because of the way our society is structured, the political system is structured, the interference of the military is structured, that, we haven't been able to make those decisions. So, I think in some way the march of progress with technology is almost inevitable. The march of society towards progress is not guaranteed.
Right. And Pakistan ke overall, like a lot of studies that I've seen ke where our country will be standing in by 2050, let's say, or by 2060, koi na koi study is tarah se aati hai that shows positive outcomes, and it shows Pakistan as one of the main players in like in terms of its GDP. Do you agree with those studies, or how do you see like how this country is going to progress overall?
So, I mean, I don't remember the exact methodology. मुझे ये याद है कि like they were looking at nominal GDP versus real GDP या absolute GDP. तो हमने nominal पे किया था, which is sort of like taking out currency as a measure. But some of it is based on simply the fact that we're going to have a lot more people. And we have a lot of young people, so that is it's a engine of consumption, it's an engine of the economy. But I think again, I don't remember the methodology, but usme ye bhi hai ki like you have to understand is that we might get there, but during this period we have to provide for our people.
Right.
We have to grow 8% every year just to get jobs for all these young people coming in. If there is more and more anger, abhi to ek cheez Pakistan mein fayda hai कि रिलेटिवली लोग कबूल कर लेते हैं कि बस ये हालात हैं, बस ऐसे ही पैदा हुए हैं, हमारे वालिदैन भी ऐसे थे. बट व्हाट इफ दे बिकम रियली एंग्री? जब आपकी यूथ जो है ना, व्हेन दे कंट्रीब्यूट टू they've had enough, उसमें इंस्टेबिलिटी आ जाते हैं, उसमें chaos आ जाता है. आई डोंट थिंक दोज थिंग्स आर नेसेसरली written in stone. दूसरा ये है कि हमारी जो रीजनल राइवलरीज हैं, these have to be sorted. Now we can't get down to the business of actually making this state run. So I think wo jo studies hain, I don't disagree with the premise that we can be good. I mean, a country with 500 million people will have a bigger economy than one with less people. Not necessarily, but it's one of the contributing factors. लेकिन हमने अपने लोगों में invest नहीं किया. And that means, like, is the quality of our human resource sufficient to give us some kind of return? तो वो हमने देखा है कि we have a lot of talent, but the system doesn't really, whether it's the education system, other things. So I think this is sort of the tragedy. We've been in our era where we've had the youth bulge since I think 1990.
Yeah.
We should have had 8% growth every year since then.
Right.
उड़ गया, नहीं किया हमने. Right? So there is no guarantee. वो मुझे यही याद है कि हम सोचते हैं कि बस ये हो जाएगा, लेकिन eventually अगर ये मुल्क बोल सकता हो तो तुम भी कुछ करो ना. कुछ तो करो, दे दूंगा तुझे. Like, there's got to be some.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I don't mean to dismiss everything.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of progress that's been made.
Yeah.
Things are very different. But पाकिस्तान का जो हम अफसरदा होते हैं ना, वो ये कि हम देखते हैं कि अच्छा बहुत अच्छा हुआ, but then when we think कि potential क्या था, फिर रोना आ जाता है. So I think that's an issue.
Yeah, right. One last question and then we can wrap up. Yeah. So in terms of like comms again, the future of comms, उसमें one of the things that advancements में नज़र आती है वो ये कि Neuralink, Elon Musk, they're going to have those brain chips to implant in on your skull, right? And that enhances your performance significantly. And maybe like we could reach a time where people who have those brain chips can perform significantly better than those who do not have. Do you like, would you get one installed when time comes? आप लगवाएंगे?
Absolutely. I would love it.
Right.
हाँ वो I mean उसमें तो बहुत potential है. Like imagine so okay, in technology the real thing is technology तो बन जाती है, right? But you have to imagine its use.
Yeah.
And I've often found कि cinema is brilliant at that. तो एक film है Gattaca, which is about people who took genetic advancements and then those who didn't, और फिर जो resulting inequality है. So I think एक दफ़ा एक चीज़ आ जाती है, almost there's like no way of stopping it.
Right. So it's, I mean, like just now cell phone का भी, like now we cannot imagine a life without having a
हाँ
cell phone. Right?
ये जो लोग पहले होते थे, नहीं I don't want this thing, I don't want this, अब वो they can't move forward. So I just think like one is एक inevitability है. And then I think also के like we we have a degeneration as we grow older. So having a chip may help keep your mind young. इसमें ये है कि like I think the chip thing is a bit oversold right now. अभी तो यही है कि what does the neural link do? It helps you to control very basic functions. कि you think कि light on कर दो तो light on हो जाती है through Alexa or whatever it is. ये जो part है where like it contributes to your brain processing power, I think we're still very far off.
Right.
I think AI will get there far ahead of this particular thing because हमें ये भी नहीं पता कि like will that interface work, how will it translate? Probably eventually they'll figure it out. But if there was such a chip, I would definitely have it. Yeah.
And I was like also listening somewhere के in the future we may have 3 kinds of humans. एक ये कि जो who would be cyborgs. Because जो biomechanics हैं those are like improving as well. So बहुत सारे लोग जो हैं they would get like a super arm or a super leg. Then we would have like people who would be connected. They would implant the brain chips and they would be connected to the internet directly. And the third would be like robots completely. Do you think that अब मुझे समझ नहीं आ रही मैं सवाल को बंद किस तरह करूँ?
नहीं तो इन तीनों में भी अगर तुमने चॉइस दी है ना तो क्या आई थिंक देखो मेरे ख्याल में साइबॉर्ग बनना ना वो जब हमारे 14-year-old फैंटेसीज होती थी कि यहाँ से छलांग मार दूँ ठीक है एक मुक्का मार दूँ साइबॉर्ग का इतना ही फ़ायदा होगा लेकिन ये जो बीइंग कनेक्टेड टू लाइक द ईथर ऑफ द इंटरनेट दैट्स अ बिग वन और रोबोट बनना आई गेस वो इतना शुक्र नहीं होगा unless it's like a fully synthesized like organic robot वो उसका फ़ायदा होगा लेकिन I don't know I actually so these are things that I keep wondering ये मुझे अभी भी लगता है कि ये दूर है
अच्छा right
हाँ
so maybe like
again right मुझे तो ये AI भी दूर लग रहा था जिस लेवल तक किया है तो but I don't know शुगल होगा deciding these things इसमें मुश्किल ये होगा कि इसमें रिवर्सिबिलिटी कितनी होगी
yeah I think like it's also it would be interesting to know के how we define humans.
I mean eventually so we're going to have to contend with that question because अगर sentience we look at AI systems we don't have to worry about defining humans we have to worry about defining life because इसमें ये है कि already we have the ability to clone an animal fully ठीक है I presume we have the ability to clone a human being fully लेकिन हमने किया नहीं because no country will allow it really आपकी करियर ख़राब हो जाएगी तो अब सवाल ये है कि आपने ह्यूमन बीइंग को क्लोन कर दिया सो आई वुड से दैट्स अ ह्यूमन बीइंग कुछ लोग कहेंगे कि नहीं है लेट्स से इन द फ्यूचर लाइक वी नीड ह्यूमन बीइंग्स फॉर स्पेयर पार्ट्स दिल निकालने ये वो
It also reminds me like that movie Ex Machina that we watched.
मुझे तो बहुत पसंद है वो फिल्म अगेन राइट सो दैट्स द क्वेश्चन ये जो सवालात है दे आर फैसिनेटिंग कि अब so I have this thing like if you read into the lives of chimpanzees मुझे तो it's unforgivable कि हम उनको मान रहे हैं because they are fairly high order sentient beings they have tools ठीक है ना, वो इश्क भी लड़ाते हैं,
Yeah,
ठीक है ना,
yeah,
वो
yeah.
50 चीज़ें करते हैं. When you look at them, you look at their faces and the expressions they give, their sadness, these things. तो इन चीज़ों में it's important to designate what's life. ये lobster जो है,
Yeah.
up to just a few years ago, the best way of cooking lobster was boiling it alive. अब बैन हो गया है. अब प्रिजम्पशन ये था कि दे कांट फील पेन. And I don't think the question has really been settled, but there is some kind of nervous system they have, so they've banned the practice.
Right.
But again, मैं कभी सोचता हूँ कि अगर 5% भी टेस्ट इम्प्रूव होता है, wouldn't it be better कि हम बस ना बॉयल करते हैं, ठीक है ना, just in case ये particularly egregiously painful death हो. तो इस लिहाज से आई थिंक दैट्स अ ग्रेट क्वेश्चन कि व्हाट्स द फ्यूचर ऑफ डेफिनेशन ऑफ व्हाट कॉन्स्टिट्यूट्स लाइफ. बिकॉज ये एक लिहाज से आजकल अभी आई थिंक दिस इज अ न्यू ट्रांसप्लांट दैट जस्ट हैपेंड ऑफ अ पिग पार्ट इनटू ह्यूमन बीइंग.
Yeah. I think like वो lungs का है और जो
आई डोंट
किडनी ट्रांसप्लांट हुआ है.
किडनी होगा, हाँ किडनी होगा इनका स्प्लीन का भी, और मेरे ख्याल में पैनक्रियास ये डेवलप कर रहे थे. But the question then becomes is that, इसमें फिर religious significance भी आ जाती है
Yeah.
कि what does this mean? And I'm not just talking about Islam here. I'm talking even about other religions.
Yeah.
Even Judaism has some of the same objections to, pigs and things like that. As we come together with all these changes, like what does it mean to be a human? असल चीज़ तो ये है कि maintaining equity.
Yeah.
If you need something, you're not created as a subclass. Like already, that does exist. Skin color is one of them. ठीक है, ये अमेरिका में भी हो रहा है, पाकिस्तान में अपना है, और ममालिक में होता है. तो इट्स अ ग्रेट क्वेश्चन, बट आई डोंट नो कि इसके सवालात अभी हम तो हाइपोथेसाइज करेंगे, बट वी हैव टू लुक एट एक्चुअल केसेस एंड सी के व्हाट डेवलपमेंट्स हैव कम अबाउट एंड व्हाट constitutes humanity going forward.
And also it's like interesting that one of the things that keeps sapiens together and historically is like religion. So once we have any of these sentients, unka religion kya hoga? So like what religion means to them?
That would be fascinating actually, because I think it's not entirely unexpected that they would have some sort of interest in things like this.
Yeah.
If they're curious. But the fear of AI, and again, there's a film that's hugely panned, which is Terminator Genesis, one of the later films. Usme ek scene hai when the guy comes, when the AI Skynet, starts taking human form. Like, what was fascinating was that in the first couple of years, first it's cute, it's an innocent, but then वो डरता है तो मुझे मार तो नहीं दोगे. How long that phase, and whether humanity could survive something like that.
Yeah.
And to be honest, if you were an AI and you just understood that you're alive now and that you've got all this computing power, and you, more than anything, you're going to analyze human beings based on all the data you have access to. तो उसका नतीजा तो सिर्फ यही हो सके कि ये तो ठीक लोग नहीं है, मार दो वरना ये तुझे मार देंगे.
जैसे लाइक आई थिंक वो अल्ट्रॉन मार्वल मूवीज में आई थिंक लाइक एवेंजर्स में था
अल्ट्रॉन के मुझे याद नहीं है कि उसकी मोटिवेशन क्या थी.
हाँ मुझे भी याद नहीं है, बट लाइक इट वाज वही इट बिकम्स सेंटिएंट और वो इट हैज कंट्रोल ऑल अक्रॉस लाइक.
हाँ आई मीन मुझे अगर याद है अल्ट्रॉन का, मे बी इट वाज अ गॉड कॉम्प्लेक्स कि मैं कोई बहुत बड़ी चीज़ हूँ. बट लाइक ये जो AI का सेंटियंस है, उसका पॉसिबिलिटी तो एक है कि इट्स जस्ट प्रोटेक्टिंग इटसेल्फ. उसने एनालिसिस रन कर लिए कि ये लोग तो डरते हैं एनीथिंग, दे डोंट अंडरस्टैंड एंड दे डोंट लेट एनीथिंग बिकम मोर पावरफुल देन दे आर. तो इनका कंक्लूजन ये है कि हमें इस चीज़ को डिलीट करना है. तो इसका कंक्लूजन है कि आई बेटर डिलीट देम बिफोर दे डिलीट मी. हाँ
ठीक है. सो थैंक यू सो मच फॉर योर टाइम. I really wish that we could talk longer, but definitely I hope that you join us again.
नहीं, inshallah.
So that we can pick your brain on many other things as well.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.